Now, the other topic is documented information. So this requirement is ultimately the same for both standards. The terms of procedures and records disappeared and were replaced by the terms of documented information that needs to be maintained, which would correspond to the documents, or retained, which be the records. Then we find the requirement of monitoring and measurement. So key performance indicators are emphasized for all the processes, but the requirements is practically the same. The internal audit is the same in planning and implementation, but the requirements and standards are obviously different. Then we have the management review, where the requirements are the same, although there are, some differences in the inputs and output results required. And there are also non-conformities and corrective actions that are basically the same for both standards. Okay, so we can see that there are a lot of similarities between the two standards. Okay. Okay, so I leave here for you in the chat. So I will leave here the link for two articles, okay, that you can check later. How to integrate ISO 14001 and 9001, and ISO 14001 2015 integration with ISO 9001. What has changed? Okay. Now let's see the differences. Okay, so on the other hand, there are many differences, mainly because of the time available in this webinar. I have tried to summarize them as much as possible, focusing on the most relevant ones. The first difference between 9001 and 14001 is that 9001 has many requirements regarding processes. And these are very specific for different processes, from purchasing, design and development, sales, production, Basically, clause 8 of the standard is different from ISO 14001. Clause 8 represents the central basis of the standard, and this is where the biggest differences can be found. The second main difference is customer orientation by measuring customer satisfaction, and this, of course, is an exclusive requirement of ISO 9001. So it is necessary to develop a system where it is possible to identify or obtain the opinions, the perceptions of consumers or customers or clients regarding the products and services of the organization. Of course, in addition to customer satisfaction, there might be complaints. So therefore, ISO 9001 requires the organization to deal with customer complaints. ISO 14001 has many more requirements regarding risks related to and resulting from environmental aspects. Therefore, it will be necessary to determine and evaluate the environmental aspects within the organization and their impacts on the environment. The second major difference would be the operational controls for significant environmental aspects. Again, these requirements can be found in clause 8 of the ISO 14001 standard. And basically, what the standard requires is to define the operational controls for each of the significant environmental aspects that have been identified according to the criteria that the organization has selected. And the last big difference between these two standards would be the emergency, preparedness, and response. This is related only to ISO 14001, and the standard requires that the company defines the plans for emergency preparedness and response, and also carry out training and tests on emergency situations related to environmental incidents. Okay. Now, let's see some implementation issues. So we'll talk about the most usual questions regarding the integration of the two standards. The first and easiest question to answer is the question of whether the QMS and the EMS should be integrated into a single integrated management system. And of course, the answer is affirmative. since the best way to maintain both standards, the certificate and the management systems, and really get benefits for the company is to integrate both standards in a single management system. In this way, it is possible to reduce the amount of documentation and avoid duplicating processes and activities, among other things. Therefore, integrating the systems in a single IMS will save time that can be invested in other tasks and also avoid wasting resources, especially those related to personnel. Of course, joining the documents is not enough when integrating the systems, since they do not show much if they are not implemented afterward. Therefore, in addition to joining some of the documents, such as the quality manual, the procedure for conducting the internal audit, and others, what really has to be done is to apply the requirements of both standards to the processes. So, for example, incorporating environmental operational controls into the processes is the best way to do this. So, for example, if there is a design and development process, it would be necessary to consider the applicable environmental operational controls, or, for example, in the production process, it would also be necessary to include these environmental operational controls in the production procedures. So this is, without any doubt, one of the greatest evidence that the system is integrated and effective. On the other hand, PAS 99 Integrated Management, so PAS 99 was published with specifications for integrated management standards in implementing and integrating management systems. So it is a framework to manage several management systems in a single system. This document is available and can be of great help in the integration of management systems. So the last issue is the integration of quality policy and environmental policy. So in my opinion, the merging, the union of these two documents is really a sign that the systems have been integrated, since the policy represents the general and strategic direction that the company follows, and evidence that the organization is clear about what it wants to achieve as to the quality of its products and services, customer satisfaction, and that it is committed to the environment in relation, for example, to the prevention of pollution. When you have a single document that covers all these topics, you can consider that a good basis is established to define the objectives. Well, until you reach the review by the management. Crystal is just asking right now, is it required to have one policy? No, it's not mandatory to have one policy. You can have a quality policy and an environmental policy. What I'm saying, it's a possibility. It's a good sign of real integration is when you have a single document. And by the way, Theogene is asking, what is PAS 99? So PAS 99 is not an ISO standard, but rather a publicly available specification. So PAS is publicly available specification developed by the British Standard Institution. PAS 99 provides guidance on how to integrate multiple management systems standards within an organization effectively. It is specifically designed to help organizations streamline and harmonize their various management systems. Okay. Now, I leave here a link for an article called How to Implement Integrated Management Systems. Okay, let's continue. Okay, roles. Okay, so the next big issue in the implementation and subsequent maintenance project will be distributing the functions and responsibilities within the integrated management system. Since the requirement for the management representative no longer exists with ISO with the 2015 versions of 9001 and 14001, this creates great confusion among the people. Okay. However, the fact that something is no longer mandatory does not mean that you have to forget. So in many cases, having a management representative who coordinates the activities and collects system reports can benefit the management system. Okay, so a manager for the system. So the next important position is that of the person responsible for the environment. Someone who would be in charge of environmental issues and ISO 14001 within this integrated management system. So in small companies, these functions as well as quality issues would fall on a single person. Although if the company has at least 50 employees, it would be better to have two people since each of the standards requires a different set of knowledge. When implementing the standard and starting this project, it is very positive, if possible, to implement the standard as a project. So in those cases, it would be necessary to have a project team and a project leader. I think this is better for the quality manager to be the project leader, but again, you will need people with different knowledge of quality and environment. And the most important people that should be considered to be part of this project are those responsible for the processes. For example, the production manager, the supply manager, the sales manager, and these types of positions within the company. So what is considered the middle class management staff? So the implementation process can be carried out more effectively and quickly if the responsibilities are shared and each department does its part of the work regarding both ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. It's what I call doing things in parallel or doing things in a series. Okay, if you do things in parallel, you can implement much faster. For example, when identifying the aspects, it is better for each department to do it independently since the staff of this department knows their processes best. In addition, the more people involved in an implementation project, the later maintenance of the standard will be facilitated, okay? Because people know why we are doing this, what was behind developing these kind of rules, these kind of practices, controls, procedures. And of course, for every project within the organization to be successful in the company, it is necessary to have the support of top management. For this reason, it is also good to define the sponsor of the project at the beginning, okay? Now, I will leave here links for 4 articles, okay? What is the job of the quality manager according to ISO 9001? The other one is, what is the job of the environmental management system manager? The other one is, how to get management buy-in for an ISO 14001 project, and 4 crucial techniques to convince your top management about ISO 9001 implementation. Okay, now let's go to the implementation steps. Okay, so the first step would be the context of the organization. Determine context of the organization. So the organization's context provides the basis for building the management system. Regarding ISO 9001, it will be necessary to determine all internal and external issues affecting the quality of products and services and consumer satisfaction. On the other hand, in ISO 14001, you will have to define all internal and external issues related to environmental protection. It is the same activity, but dealing with different topics. As part of the internal context, we will have to define the structure of the organization, the map of processes, and so on in terms of quality. And again, this type of aspect will be reflected in ISO 14001. Also, within the internal context, so clause 4, are the organization's culture, the company's communication processes, and the training and awareness level. Now, regarding the external context of the organization, it will be necessary to study the situation in the market and the opinion of consumers in the case of ISO 9001. While regarding ISO 14001, it will be required to determine the environmental conditions in the region in which the organization is located or nearby, like the neighborhood. Okay, so in many cases, governmental institutions have already analyzed the environmental situation, which can be of great value when determining the external context related to ISO 14001. So it can be beneficial to have a procedure for determining the organization's context in which it is defined who will be involved, which elements will be examined, how often, how it will be carried out, etc. Okay. Now, the next step would be to define the policy of the QMS and EMS. So if you decide to define it separately or a single policy, if you opt for a single document. The purpose of these policies or the policy of the IMS is to determine the strategic direction of the organization concerning customer satisfaction, quality, and environmental protection, what needs to be achieved, what the company is committed to, and also to include some commitments that are necessary to have within those policies, such as the commitment to comply with legal requirements, regulation. Now, it is better to have only one policy for both standards because this shows that it is an efficient company that avoids duplication of documentation. But again, not mandatory. The next step would be to provide resources. Okay, so this step corresponds to clause 7 of the standard, which contains the most common requirements of both standards. So control of records and documents, competence and awareness, and others. For this reason, I consider that before going into more detail to define other processes, define at the beginning the procedure, the rules for the control of records and documents. That is, how those documents will be, so the format, how they will be identified, will be responsible, etc. Now, what comes next? The next step would address risks and opportunities related to quality and environmental protection. So this can be carried out using the same process shared by both standards. Okay. Again, it is necessary to address those risks and opportunities that arise from the organization's context so that it can be part of the same process, the organization's context. Okay. Now, defining any methodology, procedure, or similar thing is not mandatory. Still, it will also be necessary to determine those risks and opportunities concerning the organization and take action to address those risks and opportunities. The most advisable thing is to develop some kind of register of risks and opportunities and actions taken to address them. There is no strict requirement for documenting those risks and opportunities, okay, according to the standards. Still, in the management review, evaluating the effects of the actions, so their effectiveness, taken to address the risks and opportunities will be necessary. So it is better to record them in some way. Later, okay, so it will be necessary to identify the environmental aspects. This identification has to be carried out process by process, since in this way, the process approach would be demonstrated. Still, at the same time, it provides us with the necessary information to know exactly where to establish the operational controls that come later. So in terms of the life cycle, okay, it will be required to first identify the phases of the life cycle of the product or service, and then identify the environmental aspects and impacts related to each of the stages of that cycle. And of course, to establish operational controls on the extension in what is possible to mitigate the consequence of environmental impacts. So, for example, in some cases, after producing the product and leaving the organization, you will have little to do with how that product will be handled or managed. So, what can be done as operational control is to write user instructions for the consumer or similar things. Like, for example, don't throw used batteries in the garbage bin. So the next step is evaluating environmental aspects, for which it is necessary to develop some methodology and criteria. So this can be something simple, such as measuring or evaluating impact, consequence, and probability, or a different set of criteria can be defined. It's up to the organization. So, small question. Angel asked, how do I ensure the adherence of all personnel, especially by supervisors in the implementation of the EMS? So, okay, you can ensure adherence to EMS by providing comprehensive training, setting clear responsibilities. Let's see, lead by example, monitor compliance through regular audits, so internal audits, and incorporating adherence into performance evaluations for all personnel, especially supervisors. Okay, now let's continue with implementation steps. So once the context of the organization, risk, and environmental aspects have been defined, it is a good time to define the objectives. And this can be done at the same time for both standards, since the requirements for the two standards are the same. SMART, so SMART must be intelligent by its acronym in English. So objectives need to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and programmable. So this means that a period of time is necessary to determine whether the objectives have been achieved or not. It will also be required to define responsibilities and actions to achieve those objectives, and both have to be documented. Okay, so it's interesting if you search for that. So it's interesting to look for when you have a plan and you are implementing the plan, and you are monitoring that implementation, monitoring the results. It's interesting to see what that does to us humans in terms of psychological level. Yeah. The next step is to make this plan work by establishing operational controls for ISO 9001 and for ISO 14001. So regarding the 9001 standard, it is necessary to define operational controls for the processes, that is, to determine the inputs and outputs, records, whether the procedures will be documented or not, and work instructions for different processes such as sales, purchasing, production, etc. On the other hand, the ISO 14001 standard requires defining operational controls for those significant environmental aspects. However, this standard also has other requirements for processes, such as for purchasing, where supplies need to be evaluated if they are following any environmental protection system, or as in the design and development, where it is also necessary to consider environmental protection within this process, or the planning of a new product or service. Therefore, for each process with a significant environmental aspect, these operational controls must be implemented and joined to the operational controls related to quality. So once the controls are established, developing KPIs or key performance indicators is good, and they will tell you if the system is working and give the expected results. So the result of this step would be to carry out the monitoring and measurement for the satisfaction of the client, going through the measurement and monitoring of the environmental aspects and the effects of the operational controls. Now, what comes next? Internal audit. So then comes the internal audit, which is very similar in planning and implementation, although there are different requirements. I recommend having only one process and a single plan in which it is decided which processes, which areas or departments will be audited, when and how they will be audited, and whether for both standards simultaneously or separately. This depends entirely on the organization and its needs. Well, later we will have the management review. So I suggest carrying out this step at the same time for both standards. So once all the information for the management review has been collected, a meeting will be organized with the top management, and all the entries will be discussed. Subsequently, new objectives are defined, new actions to address recent opportunities, etc. And the final step in implementing and maintaining the system is continual improvement, or corrective actions and nonconformity. So the requirements are basically the same for both standards, And this can be done with the same records, the same procedures, etc. Now, let me see if I can do something here just to show you. So our at 𝗧𝗴𝗏, our ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 integrated documentation toolkit contains all the necessary templates. Let me show you how it looks. Let me see if I can show you. Yeah, we have here the whole content of the 9001, 14001 integrated documentation toolkit. So you see we have procedures, we have forms, we have so this kind of records, examples, like training program, procedure for communication. We have, for example, for clause 8, so samples for procedures for production and service provision, for construction, for food processing. But for the environment, something like guidelines for oil waste management, for medical waste management. So this column here is for the clauses of 9001, this one here for the clauses of 14001. Okay, and those here with this mark here, the little star means that is mandatory document or record. So this is an example. All the documents and all the documents that are in our toolkit. Let's see an example, okay, of a procedure. So procedure for design and development. So this is for an integrated management system. So you will see, so we have here process flow. Let's see, you see here process flow. Okay, then we have the topics that are in ISO 9001, like the planning, like the authorities. But for when you go, for example, here for the inputs, you will have things like when it comes to the requirements, you can include here, okay, the statutory, regulatory, environmental, and other requirements. So we are integrating quality and environment here. Just another document, just this form for the project tasks to use to collect the inputs for design and development. You see here product characteristics, and you see here statutory, regulatory, environmental requirements and standards or codes of practice to be implemented for, you see, integration this way. When you do one thing in terms of quality, at the same time, you are considering the information regarding the environment. Okay? Okay, let's see. All right. Let's see. So you can see the details of this toolkit. Here, I will put here the link for the 9001 and ISO 14001 toolkit. Okay. Now, based on questions received before this webinar, the biggest challenges in integration are differing objectives. So ISO 9001 focus on quality management, while ISO 14001 addresses environmental management. So balancing these objectives and ensuring they align with the organization's goals can be challenging. So one of the things that came out from your questions. Competing priorities, okay, quality and environmental objectives may sometimes compete for resources and attention. So organizations must find ways to harmonize these priorities effectively. And from my experience, I would say that the resources are scarcer now than 20, 30 years ago when I started working with this management system standards. So cultural shift, it's another challenge. Integrating two systems often necessitates a cultural shift within the organization. So employees may need to change their mindset and adopt a holistic approach to quality and environmental responsibility. And risk assessment. So integrating risk assessment for quality and environmental aspects requires a comprehensive approach to identify and manage risks effectively. So, for example, let me see. Ishak is asking, what are the pitfalls for integrating different systems? Well, I would say that those pitfalls include misaligned objectives, resistance to change, lack of expertise, okay, pure communication. So things that, in certain way, feed these challenges that we translate here into different objectives, competing priorities, cultural shift, risk assessment. So be careful with training, be careful with insufficient resource allocation. So this can hinder a successful integration. Okay. Let me see. Please share. I invite you to share in the chat or in the Q&A what are your biggest challenges with ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 integration. Okay, considering these 4 topics: the differing objectives, competing priorities, cultural shift, and risk assessment. Okay. Okay. Let me see now. Okay, so let's go to conclude. As you can see, using the proper implementation sequence and focusing on the most important documents will speed up your implementation project. And for that purpose, you can use 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶𝘀 ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 integrated documentation toolkit. So here's the link with more details. You have here the link. I'll also send you the meeting link to schedule a call with our toolkit expert. He'll explain how the toolkit works and show you any documents you'd like to see. Okay, so here's the toolkit expert meeting link. Now let's go to the Q&A. Just before starting the answering to your questions, some of you requested tips about implementing a QMS. So we in 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶𝘀 developed a course for all who want to implement a management system for their organization or as external consultants. So the video lectures are free. You can watch the whole videos for free. Perhaps they could help. So I'll leave you the links for our ISO 9001 lead implementer course. That is also the link for the ISO 14001 lead implementer course. And we have also the foundations course, both for 9001 and for 14001. Now, before we begin with the question and answer session, I would like to mention that you can ask me anything about ISO 9001 or 14001 directly. Just email me and I'll answer as quickly as possible. If you want to leave before this Q&A session is over, please complete the short survey that will open after you leave the webinar. Okay, let's see. Questions. Ines is asked, my company is preparing for certification of ISO 9001, 14001, and 45001. What is the approach recommended? Where should we start? So I think, Ines, you can use those steps, the slides with the steps, because the structure is the same. So when we start with the context, it's the same. Context for quality, context for the environment, context for health and safety. Of course, the details are different, but the motions are the same. Okay, so then a policy, then the objectives. You need to determine the quality issues. You need to determine the environmental issues. You need to determine the risks and dangers regarding health and safety. Okay, but yeah, it's that. Okay. Question from Dennis. How does the ISO 9001 2024 amend come into play? So here, okay, so when we determine the context in the first step, we ask that. So we ask if climate change can somehow help or hinder our ability to achieve our objectives, environmental objectives or quality objectives. We also consider if there is any requirements, any demands by relevant interested parties regarding climate change. Okay, so in some organizations, what they find, they can say, oh, regarding internal and external issues, there are no relevant, for example, no relevant issues regarding the climate change. But then when they go into clause 4.2, they realize that, for example, because of an important customer is demanding data regarding the climate change, so they need to do something. They need to change something because of that in order to provide that information to an important customer. Okay, just an example. Okay, so this one, what is, okay, already answered this one. So another question from Dennis. Are the integrated toolkits are the same of the standalone ISO 9001 and 14000 toolkits, or are they different? So they have some differences. For example, because look, for example, I showed that procedure that I show is incorporated there, the topics from ISO 14001. Okay. So can you integrate quality and environmental plan to be in one document? The question from 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶𝘀𝗁. Yes, I think we can do that. Yes. So you can have, so first, what do you mean by quality plan and environmental plan? So if by quality plan you mean a plan to achieve the quality objectives, or a plan to achieve the environmental objectives, I think, yes, we can do that. Yeah. And I like to do that because it's when top management, or when the management team looks into the performance of the integrated management system, they see one document. They see one document where all the performance is there. Question from Timothy. If a company has SDG goals they work on, does this mean they have an EMS? Okay, so what do you mean by SDG goal? Sustainability development goals, perhaps, or okay, something like that. But that's not necessarily, okay, an EMS, an environmental management system, okay, because an environmental management system has many components. So don't think so. I don't think it's the same thing, okay. Question from Leah. Does 𝗲𝗴𝗏𝗏 also have toolkits that show how to integrate documentation for more than 2 ISO systems? I mean, thinking 9001, 14001, and 13485. No, for the time being, no. Question from Terry. Which compliance platform you recommend that will accommodate the interaction of these standards? This kind of advice that I cannot provide here on this webinar. Sorry. Pelagie asks, how can initialize this project? QMS, anyone in the society? So please, I think it's, I don't know if I'm understanding your question, but what I do is follow those steps that in those slides that I showed. Would be the best way to initialize this project. So you start with the roles. What will be the leader of the project? Will be the sponsor of the project. Don't forget the participation of top management to validate, to show that this is important. Have a project plan, and then follow those steps, starting with the determination of the context. Okay, now question from Rose. My company has ISO 9001, ISO 17025, and we are certified by, okay, it's some nuclear specification. We want to implement ISO 14001 to reduce our footprint and impact on the environment. Can the same individual who manage all those be the same manager for ISO 14001? Yes, the same individual can be manager also for ISO 14001. What I recommend is that individual get some training in the ISO 14001 requirements. Okay. So, question from Pauline. Is ISO 14001 relevant for public sector entities? Okay, so I would say that yes, because public sector entities also interact with the environment, so they also have environmental impacts. Okay, so in some countries, like in mine, some public sector entities have a different regulation or legislation in some situations. Okay, but they interact with the environment. They impact the environment. So in that sense, even if they don't go for certification, is useful to be sure that they comply with the environment, to be sure that they are good neighbors, to be sure that they are efficient organizations. Yes, I would say so. Question by Sanjaya. Other than 9001 and 14001, what are the other ISO company have as a... Oh, I don't understand the question. Can you rephrase your question, Sanjaya, please? Thank you. Question from Derek, at what point would we be ready for an audit and hopefully accreditation of ISO 14001, given that we already have 9001? How much planning and integration is enough? Okay, so let's see. You are already ISO 9001 certified, okay? So now what you need to do is to implement ISO 14001. So you need to go through the steps to the clauses that are in ISO 14001. You need to determine the context regarding the 14001. You need to set the environmental policy. You need to determine the environmental aspects, to evaluate them, to establish environmental controls. What you need also to do after that is to try to integrate at the same time, try to integrate that with your ISO 9001. So, for example, you have an ISO 9001 policy right now. Okay, so define the topics that you want to include in your environmental policy, and then what you can do is try to develop a single document that will be our IMS policy. Okay, so that will be a way of integration. And at some point, you do an internal audit to evaluate if you are complying with ISO 14001, and then you can go for the certification audit. Okay, so okay. Sanjaya is asking, apart from ISO 9001 and ISO 14001, what other ISO certifications are typically held by construction design consultants? So I would say ISO 45001, for example. Why? Because we want that the construction projects have embedded since the beginning good health and safety characteristics. I would say for certain situations, ISO 27001 could be relevant because, every week I read in a newspaper or in a magazine that a company was hacked. There's a problem with cybersecurity. Could be relevant. Okay, so at least those are two that came to my mind right now. Okay, thank you, Sanjaya. Now, any more questions? Let me see if yes, I have questions. No, I think we don't have more questions. All right. So, okay. I think I've covered all of your... Oh, no, that's right here. Okay. one question that I have that someone may ask me before the webinar. So Terry asked how to help my clients get ready for ESG. So help your clients so you can get ready for ESG by assessing their current practices. So what are the current practices? Identify key ESG risks and opportunities. Okay, so what are the current practices? So you can check there if there are any gaps. Then identify or determine key risks and opportunities, set measurable goals, implement relevant policies, and establish transparent reporting aligned with recognized frameworks, okay, like GRI, for example. Okay, and Abed asked, can you please give us an example of management review meeting for an integrated QMS and EMS? Okay, so it could be something like this, Abed. Oh, let me see here. All right. So agenda for management review meeting. So you can start with an opening and welcome, chairperson. Step number 1. Number 2, review actions from the previous management review. You know, I already attended management reviews that were fantastic, but really, really fantastic. And they invited me to the next management review, and most of the actions were not implemented. So that first management review was a waste of time, okay? Because if you don't implement your your decisions, your management review could be very good, but in terms of being effective, it's not effective. So review, evaluation of changes in context, so internal and external issues, so review of significant changes in internal and external factors affecting both the QMS and EMS, new risks and opportunities arising from these changes, performance evaluation, so review of key process performance indicators and trends, product and service quality objectives, environmental objectives and targets, review of audit results, analysis, non-conformities, corrective actions, and opportunities for improvement. So then comes customer feedback. And so both for quality, satisfaction, and complaints, but also for the environment, feedback from external stakeholders, including regulators, partners, or communities. Environmental performance, so compliance obligations, both for quality, both for product quality, both for environment, review of environmental aspects and impacts, monitoring results related to environmental objectives, effectiveness of risk management and opportunities, so status of risks, risk mitigation actions for QMS and EMS. What comes more? Adequacy of resources, so review of personnel competency, training needs, and resource allocation. Alignment with strategic direction, okay, so something like, is our policy still updated? Okay, recommendations for improvement, and conclusion and decisions. And of course, next review meeting. And just one note is, remember the language in the standard. The words used in the standard is consideration, okay? So we need to consider these topics. So for example, here, so for example, for the environmental performance, if you have 10 different indicators that you need to monitor because of your environmental aspects or because of compliance obligations, you don't need to discuss all of them in detail during the management review. If of those 10, 8 are okay and 2 have some issues, so okay, in your report for the management review with the input information, you put information there about the 10 topics. But during the meeting, the meeting, you focus your attention on those 2 topics with issues. Okay. Okay, so yeah. So I think I've covered all your questions. So let's wrap up the webinar. Just a few words before we finish. So as I mentioned, this 1-hour webinar was intended to give you a general overview of integrating 9001 and ISO 14001. not to go into a detailed discussion. For that, please take a look at our blogs. You can ask me anything about ISO 9001 or ISO 14001 directly by email. You can also download this presentation deck from our website or take a look at video tutorials and documentation templates. We'll send you the email with all the necessary links. Finally, if you joined this webinar through Zoom, you'll see a short survey, so I would kindly ask to you to spend a minute to fill it in. The recording of this presentation will be available in a few hours. You'll receive a link to the recording. If you join the webinar through LinkedIn and YouTube, you will receive a link to the short survey now, and the link to the presentation will be posted on our event page in a few minutes. That will be all. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your questions, and I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Have a nice day.